The ultimate challenge when it comes to creating a selection is the fuzzy stuff: hair, feathers, and fur. In this lesson, we'll take a look at an example of a particularly challenging selection. As you can see, this dog is furry, and what's worse, his fur is very wispy and all over the place. Let's see how good a job we can do creating a selection so we can tone down the background a bit more to enable the dog to really stand out. I'll start by choosing my quick selection tool, and then I'll drag across the background in order to create a selection of that area. As you can see, it does a reasonably good job of snapping to the edge of the dog, but in a few places it does a less than ideal job. I'll go ahead and perform some cleanup work here. I'll reduce the size of my brush with the left square bracket key and drag into a few of the areas that it missed. And it looks like that's the only areas that it missed, but it also created a selection that includes part of the dog in a number of places. So I'll use my Subtract from Selection option, holding the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Macintosh, and then click and drag into the areas that I do not want selected, in this case portions of the dog. I'll go ahead and clean up the ears up here and some of this other fur, and it looks like that's going to be a pretty good starting point for us. I'm going to get this small detail up here, just because I want to get the selection as good as possible when I first start out in cleaning up that selection. That's looking to be a pretty good job, so I think we're ready to try to clean up the edge of this selection. I'll go ahead and click the Refine Edge button up on the Options bar, and in this case I think I'll set the preview to the Overlay option. You can see that we're off to a reasonably good start here, but there are areas of the fur that are not really selected, and I'm sure probably some areas that are selected that should not be, so we definitely want to try to clean up that edge just a little bit. I'll start by turning on the Smart Radius option and then increase the radius just a little bit, and hopefully that will clean up some areas of the dog's fur, but obviously it's not doing a perfect job at this point. And that's where we need to paint into certain areas to basically tell Photoshop that we want it to reanalyze in more detail certain areas. So for example, I'll paint along the edge of the dog's fur here, and that's looking a little better. You can see that it is analyzing that area and trying to determine what is actually fur and what is background. Of course, it's doing so by analyzing the areas that are already selected and comparing those to the areas that are not selected, and basically trying to figure out what the difference between those two areas is. Now, I don't worry too much about the particularly wispy hairs. In other words, when there's only one hair, I'm not really concerned about trying to keep it in the selection. It is so small and insignificant that it really won't be a major issue in the final result. So I'm focused more on just the wispy details where we want to make sure that we're cleaning up the result as best we can. Now, there's certainly going to be some challenging areas. For example, where the grass goes over the paw here, I would expect that to be a little more difficult than other areas in terms of the final result. But overall, it looks like we're getting a great result here, and I'm not even spending a whole lot of time really focusing on this. And in this type of situation where I'm showing you how the process works, I naturally want to work a little bit faster than I might otherwise, and yet, as you can see, the result is looking very, very nice. I think we're in pretty good shape now, so I'll go ahead and click the OK button. Note, by the way, that I'm not adjusting the smooth, feather, contrast, or shift edge settings. Simply by painting to refine the edge, increasing the area that's being used for edge detection, I'm able to get a great result. And that result will include some automatic feathering, so I don't need to increase the feathering amount, and certainly don't need the other controls here. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and now we have a refined selection. Let's take a look at how it's worked out. I'll go ahead and add a new Curves Adjustment layer, and because I have a selection active, when I add this Curves Adjustment layer, the layer mask for this layer will automatically reflect the selection. In other words, this Curves Adjustment will only affect the background. And you can see that reflected in the layer mask. The dog is black, meaning deselected or not affected by this adjustment, and the background is white, meaning that it is going to be affected by this adjustment. I'll go ahead and adjust the curve, in this case dragging it downward a bit because I'd like to darken up the background just a little more so the dog really stands out. And as you can see, in fact I'm going to zoom in closely on some of the fur detail here, we've got a great result. I'll turn off my adjustment, and before and after you can see that certainly some of the very edge areas of the fur are getting affected by that darkening, but it blends in perfectly with the rest of the image. How good your tools or technique The simple fact is that creating a selection of a fuzzy subject is a challenge. Keep in mind that in most cases, the adjustments you apply in such cases are going to be reasonably subtle, so even a selection that isn't completely 100% perfect will likely yield good results, as long as you take a careful approach to creating that selection in the first place.